is now 10 o'clock a.m. and we are going to get started with our fourth and final lecture in our continuing conversation about Africa's contribution to the people and the places of the Bible. So far, we've looked at Kemet, took a deep dive at Kemet, and we established why it was important for us to know about Kemet or Egypt or Mizraim, depending upon which document that you're reading, but all the same place. Modern day Egypt is mentioned 611 times in the Bible. Cush is a prominent empire in the Bible as well. Moses married a Cushite woman. Many of the pharaohs had Cushite mothers. And so there was this interaction, interplay, give, take, love, war, hate, love between the two empires. We looked at that last week. We moved on to the discussion about the three empires that came up, essentially where Kemet was after, or rather at where Cush existed prior to its demise in 350 AD. So lastly, now we come to the third of the Nilotic, and when I say Nilotic, I mean significant empires that existed along the Nile River. Kemet being the most well-known, Cush being somewhat known, and now we're going to talk about the kingdom or the empire of Oxen. It's spelled two different ways, A-K-S-U-M, A-X-U-M. Either way is proper spelling, but we're going to talk about Oxen. I first learned of Oxen probably about 3.5 years ago. There's Henry Louis Gates is a professor of African-American history, African-American studies at Harvard University. He does a lot of collaboration with PBS, and one of his collaborations that he did, and I strongly encourage you, if this material that we've covered is somewhat interesting to you, I think it is if you're actually attending, I would encourage you to go on PBS's website and look at the Lost Kingdoms of Africa. So it lists some of the empires. Maybe we'll discuss some of them on another day. The Western empires like Mali, Songhai or Songhai, some people refer to it either way, and talks about the famed city of Timbuktu and Gao. These are places where actual universities existed. You know, we're talking in the 1400s and the 1500s in the west coast of Africa. And all of that is important because the narrative that obtains or that exists in the West is that the Africans simply were people who lived in the bush, who worshiped the sun, the moon, the rivers, the grass, the trees, and had no sense of what we call civilization in science and organization and government. And the fact is, the historical fact is, the objective fact is that that's just not true. So if you find this kind of material interesting, then I commend to you the study of the series of documentaries that were done by Henry Louis Gates in conjunction with PBS. It's a very good documentary series of actually documentaries. But in that, when I was looking at this, and I noticed that there were a lot of different empires that at some point, when they reached their apex, they were Muslim empires, or they were in the Islamic realm of kingdoms, religions. But there was one distinctive empire that I'd never heard of. And what was particularly unique about this empire, from my point of view, is that it was a Christian empire. So it struck my attention and caught my attention because, number one, it was powerful. Number two, we had never heard of it before. At least I'd never heard of it. And so that's Oxum, AKSUM or AXUM, either way is proper spelling. Now, to dive into it, let me give you the geographical orientation. I told you that Oxum is the last of the Nilotic, meaning the empires that were located geographically along the Nile. Let me back up and give you some just world history because I think it's important and it's forward-looking. You name the major empire or the major civilization, I can tell you largely the river. If we're talking about China, there are two rivers, right? There's the Yellow River and there's the Yangtze River. And China's great, vast, and continuous civilization started along the river. And I would argue now, because we're not just having a secular conversation, I would argue from a biblical and spiritual perspective that is divine placement. That is by divine design, that when God wants to establish people for a long period of time, he will situate them along a great river, okay? So then, just as an example of this, if we go forward in time and we're inside of the Bible, we're discussing when Israel wasn't actually Israel, it was Judah. Keeping in mind that Judah and Israel are the same people, but at one point they had a civil war. So the southern kingdom became Judah. But when Judah was exiled, it was sent to a place in Babylon, but the prophet Ezekiel in the 17th chapter of the book talks about God's punishment of Israel, where they go into captivity for 70 years, but at the same time, God's preservation, because God is a multitasker. He can punish and preserve us and protect us at the same time, and he does that. But in the case of Judah, what he did is that he situated them by a great river. I don't want to go too far afield because I think all of this is relevant to the conclusion that I'm going to reach today. So I want you to stay tuned with me for the conclusion that we're going to get to today, because I think you're going to find it fascinating, and you're going to see that we're going to have obviously we need to have a part 3 conversation. But I'm talking about Oxen, and I'm talking about the fact that we had Kemet, we had Cush, and now we're talking about Oxen, that they all were located near a great river. And I'm giving you a much broader understanding that that's the way it goes when God is setting up great empires. And we can move forward to the Danube, which is the river that runs through Germany. We can move forward to Thames, which is the river that runs through England, that London is actually on the actual banks of. We can move forward to India, the Indus Valley, the Indus River, and the Ganges River, which is where the Indian, not as in the Native Americas here in the United States, but as in the actual country of India. It started along the Indus and the Ganges River. So now, again, just tuck that little fact, that nugget, that when people are situated along a major river, that is God's signature move, where he is planting them there for great things to come. So now let's see if I can share my screen with you, and let's talk about Oxen here. Can y'all see Oxen? Tell me, and just go ahead and you can unmute your mic. I just need to know if you can see it.
I see you.
You don't see Oxen?
No, I see you.
I see it.
I can see it.
Okay.
I see it.
All right.
Turn the other way.
All right. Some can see it, so I'm assuming that for the most part, I am sharing my screen. Now, so what you notice is at the very top of the map, you see Egypt there, right? Then below that, or Kemet, then below that, you see Nubia or Cush. And so I want you to see where it existed in relationship to the empires that we've been discussing up until this point. I want you to take note of the fact also that the Nile River essentially runs right through it. And just so you know, and maybe you care, maybe you don't care, the Nile River is the largest river in the world, but there is a Blue Nile and a White Nile. The Blue Nile begins in modern day Ethiopia, or ancient Oxen. You notice that Oxen was bordered on the left by the Nile River, but on the right, it was bordered by the Red Sea. Now, what made Oxen very powerful is that if you notice the Red Sea, there are people that the Europeans were trying to find a quick way to get to Asia so that they could trade with India and China. And one path was coming through the Red Sea. Well, at the very bottom there's a very narrow point, if you can see right there in that city. There's a city called Agilis. It's not quite at the bottom, but that city, that port city there is what made Oxen a great empire, because essentially what they did is they set up a toll booth there for ships going up the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, or coming down to try to get into the Indian Ocean and to get over to India. So they were right on the point of where trade was happening. And I will tell you that this is something that is true throughout history. Whenever a people controlled a critical point where trade was occurring, they became rich. And so this is how Oxen became a very powerful nation. Now, Oxen today occupies what is Ethiopia, Eritrea, Yemen. If you see on the other side of the Red Sea there, that little orange corner, that is today modern day Yemen, and then portions down at the bottom there is in the Horn of Africa, is what we call Djibouti, and some parts of Somalia. So it was a vast empire. It didn't start out as being Christian. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Can you see my face now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Didn't start out being a Christian empire, but it became a Christian empire. So why is it important? Let's just talk about why we're having this conversation. Let me just continue to do the refreshing, because there's this concept, there's this notion among us woke people, and I try to be woke. I think I'm woke. I don't know. Maybe people can tell me I'm not woke, or I'm half woke, I'm half asleep. I don't know. But this idea that Christianity is the white man's religion, that the original religion of Black people in Africa was Islam. Well, last week we kind of hit that when we talked about Alodia, Nabotia, and Makuria, how that those nations were Christian nations. They existed for hundreds of years, and they resisted the impending influence of Islam, because Islam didn't come into existence until the 7th century, all right? Somewhere around 610 AD, to be specific, and more or less, depending upon which historian you're talking to. So then what we're going to see in just a moment as we get further into this discussion about Oxen is that Oxen converted to Christianity as an entire empire in 333 AD, 333 AD. So if Islam came along after that, to be exact, 610 AD, how then could we accurately say, if we're trying to be true reporters of history, of our history? And I agree that our history has been distorted, it has been disregarded, it has been ignored, but if we're going to get to the meat of it, we really need to know what our history is, right? So the fact is that Christianity existed in Africa long before Islam was in existence, period. Secondly, as it relates to the method or the chronology of different, what we call Abrahamic religions. When I say Abrahamic religions, let me again refresh you. Those religions that the descendants of Abraham are committed to, the three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. If we want to talk about which one existed first, well, that's Judaism. And then secondly, Christianity. Then thirdly, Islam. And so in that same chronological order, those are the religions that came into Africa. First, Judaism, and we're going to talk about that. Second, Christianity. Third, Islam. So this idea that the only true religion of Africa is Islam is, again, I just want to make sure that for us, the historical record is clear. So when did Oxen first come into existence? Now, I will tell you, it depends on the historian, because the numbers are all over the place, but relatively speaking, what I see as a consistent number in terms of when it came into existence is 100 BCE. And I saw a typo in the outline, and in the workbook, rather, page 8, where it talks about the main things that we want to cover and the main takeaways. It says 100 CE, which means after Christ, but it's actually BCE. So Oxen came into existence as an empire roughly 100 years before the birth of Christ. But I also want you to keep in mind that these people that we now know today as Ethiopia, that at this point became Oxen, they are all interrelated. If we're going back to last year, where geneticists and archaeologists and anthropologists are telling us that the Great Rift Valley, which is on the east coast of Africa, is the birthplace of humanity. That in a sense, we are all Black, or as we can reduce it to the elementary age illustration, the M&Ms, we're different colors on the outside, but we're all chocolate on the inside. That's a biological genetic fact. Now, most recently, how recently? 3 days ago, a study was published by the University of Oxford. And I give you this information because I hope that some of you guys will do the additional reading, Terry, Carrie, Cousin Inez, and whoever else. I know those people do advanced outside reading. All I'm trying to do is whet your appetite. I don't think that this material can be covered and done given fair treatment in an hour over a narrow period of time in a month. Hopefully what I intend to do with this material is develop it into some type of college level type course so I can continue to share it. And while I'm on that topic, we went through the process of setting up the outline so that we could send it to you electronically. It has links in it. Please take the time and click on the links so that you can get the further and additional in-depth understanding, and so that you can share it. Would you share it with one other person electronically? Because the goal is to get the information out there, to dispel some of the misinformation that has been put out there about who we are. But now coming back. So it existed, or it came into existence, Cush came into existence, rather, Oxen came into existence 100 BC. How long did it last? Roughly 1,000 years. Again, why is it that you got this vast, mighty empire that existed for roughly 1,000 years that probably none of us ever heard of? Now, I'm going to let you unmute your mics. If there's someone on this Zoom call in this class today that knew about Oxen prior to this class, with the exception of Phyllis, because she heard me talking about it all the time. Tell me about it. When did you find out about Oxen? Anyone? Crickets. Okay. And that's the point. That there are things about our history that we don't know. And I'm being professor-ish because I'm jumping all over the place. I started to talk to you about this study that was done by the University of Oxford. It was published 3 days ago. Essentially what they did is they took all the databases with all of the, like if you take an Ancestry or if you take familytree.org, all of the databases that listed the genetic backgrounds of the people from all around the world. I understand that it's comprised of 27 million different samples. And they created, this was just 3 days ago, you can look it up because it's linked to our conversation that we're having today. They tried to create a worldwide family tree based upon all of the data points that they could put together with computer algorithms and extrapolations. And don't ask me how they did it, but I'm just giving you the broad understanding of what they did. But they created the world's first family tree. And what they were looking for is the place at which every human family tree that they know of intersect on planet Earth. And guess where that place is on planet Earth? Anybody? Just take a guess.
Oxen?
Close.
Africa.
Africa. Who said Kush?
I did, Florence.
Kush. This is, and fact check me, 3 days ago, the best and the brightest minds in the world said, listen, it all started in Kush. It all started in Kush. Now, why is that significant? Because I want to go back to Genesis chapter 2, scholars, biblical scholars. The Bible doesn't tell us where the Garden of Eden is located, but it does give us geographical clues in terms of rivers. Y'all remember that from last year? Those of you who attended the class last year? One of the places that it makes reference to is a river that runs throughout the entire Ethiopia. When the Bible uses the term Ethiopia, we've discussed this. What is it actually talking about? What place is it actually talking about?
Kush.
Kush, Africa, Black Africa, right?
Yeah.
So then if the Bible says that one of the rivers that flowed out of Eden ran through the entire land of Kush, then we know that Eden had to be somewhere in proximity to Kush. Now we take that biblical knowledge and we overlay it with the genetic information, and we're getting a pretty consistent, incredible picture. So for those of you who may have a conversation with someone and they say, well, why is it important to study Kush? That's ancient. No, that's home base for humanity. And that's why so many powerful and interesting and important things happen along that Nile River, because arguably and probably the origins of humanity is somewhere in that area. Now, I'm honored to have my sister and my cousin on. And so they know a little bit about Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And that's the place where my parents grew up. And my father used to say jokingly that Pine Bluff was a good place to be from, like he escaped from Pine Bluff. And because of his experience there, growing up in the segregated South, where they limited the formal education of Black people, they made it increasingly more difficult for Black people to get educated beyond the 8th grade. They had to buy their books, they had to pay for their classes during the time that he was growing up. And they put a lot of emphasis on forcing Black people out into the cotton fields. So then, based upon their description of Pine Bluff, and I was telling my wife this just yesterday, I wasn't looking forward to visiting Pine Bluff, but and we visited at different points and times, but the one time that I remember when we visited it, Pine Bluff, that I was fully aware of who I was and who my aunt, my relatives were. That was in 1973. But I was struck by the fact that I had people that were related to me, that looked like me. I had this extended family. I found it to be a beautiful place, not just in terms of the architecture, but I just found it to be a place that my soul connected to. So why am I telling you this corny story? Because I think that one of the tragedies of the Great Migration, where 6 million Black people left the South for the same reasons that my parents left the South, the same reason Cousin Inez, that many of our relatives went to Milwaukee, Pastor Filmore, for the same reason, Phyllis, that many of your relatives may have gone to Akron, Ohio, or to Flint, Michigan, or to Lansing. The tragedy of that is that we've been severed from the root. The root of the tree is still in the South. And by a much larger consideration, the root of the tree of our African souls is still in Africa. So that is the importance, and that is the significance of studying Africa, because it's the base, it's the home. It informs us, it enriches us, it empowers us, even today. So that's why it's important for us to know about Oxen, Cush, and Kemet. But let me go on. I told you why Oxen was important. Did you know that during the time that Oxen reached its zenith, which was somewhere around 350 AD, when it reached its zenith or its apex, its high point, that it was considered by the Persians, which had a mighty empire, and the Chinese, which at that point their empire existed for thousands of years, and the Romans. In all of those outside sources, when they wrote about Oxen, they wrote about Oxen in the way that we would write today about Russia or China. In other words, equal in power, equal influence, equal in terms of ability to wage war. They were considered a superpower in their day. And that's a cautionary tale, right, for all of humanity, that superpowers that exist today, in all likelihood, a couple of hundred years from now, may not be around. When we talk about Rome, it was a great empire, but Rome is reduced to a city. How great is the Roman Empire today? Not very great. It's just a city. I've never been to Rome, but my son was telling me that it's not even really a city. It's more like a district. It's more like International Drive. It's not even as vast as the city of Orlando. And now let's talk about Oxen, because Oxen, the empire is long gone, but there is a city today in northwest Ethiopia in the highlands called Oxen, which was at Oxen, the empire's apex, the capital city. But it too has been reduced to a city, just a city, but it exists still today. And there are artifacts, and it's worth knowing and it's worth visiting. And also there's a place there in the former empire of Oxen, modern day Ethiopia, called Lalibela. Lalibela is interesting because it's named after one of Oxen's famous kings that came after the most famous king, which we're going to get to in just a moment. Lalibela is interesting because there's a series of churches there that were carved out of the rock, out of the side of the mountain. Somewhere around 1200 AD, don't quote me, don't nail me down on the dates, but somewhere around there. These churches, they're still a tourist attraction, and they still are world known for the fact that they were carved out of the side of the mountain. And they're functional churches. Well, some of them are, some of them aren't. But the point is, Lalibela is an interesting place. The king Lalibela, who was the king of Oxen at that time, said that the angels appeared to him and told him to recreate the new Jerusalem in Ethiopia because the Jerusalem that is in Israel was under attack by the Muslims. So there was a give and take there. Now, let's go further. The port city that made the kingdom of Oxen powerful was Agilis. If you go to Ethiopia today, what you'll find is that Agilis is not on the coast of the Red Sea anymore, which is interesting because nature has a way of moving us on. One way that God can undermine a civilization is simply moving the water that they rely upon for fishing and for travel. And Oxen, actually, from what I understand, never been to Oxen, never been to Ethiopia, plan to go. Not a bucket list, but just one of my Maslow's things, because I'm not creating a bucket list, because I'm not planning to die anytime soon. Planning to be late to my own funeral. The late Jerry Girley, late to his own funeral. Okay, that's my joke for today. But
Corny.
Yeah, it is corny. I agree. But I do plan to go to Oxen, but what I understand is that the former port city of Agilis is actually 5 miles inland. That means that the Red Sea has moved that much. And so has the Nile River, and so has the Mississippi River. Some of these great rivers in the world, they've changed their courses from time to time. And that's one way. If your whole business was built upon, your whole business model was, I'm going to locate my restaurant right on the river, and the river moves 5 miles in, what are you going to do? You got it. That's what's happening. And then, there's a famous highway in the United States called Route 66. Anybody know about that? Some of you more seasoned people may know about Route 66. Used to be a lot of hotels, a lot of businesses located along Route 66, but when they put the interstate in, Route 66 was out of gas. So what is the source of power and influence today may not be tomorrow. There's a comment in the chat, and there's simply a comment, amen. All right, I'm gonna move on. Good morning, or yes, it's still morning. Good morning, Sister Lynn. So happy to see you in the class today. So this empire existed for roughly 1,000 years. And this empire, meaning Oxen, is pretty much motivated by, or established and motivated and sustained by the same thing that establishes and motivates empires today: money, trade, and armies existed to protect trade routes. Did you know that? That's why a lot of these empires had massive armies, because they served as policemen so that people would feel safe traveling from one country to the next. Navies existed so that they could protect the ships. And that's still the reason for the navies today, by the way, to protect these merchant ships as they go from one place to the next, because it's all about where the money resides. It's all about trading. The love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself, but the love of money. But let me go on. So now I'm going to talk about a very famous king, the most famous king, who was responsible for Oxen converting to Christianity. His name is Ezana. Now, when I saw this documentary, and when it came to Oxen, when Henry Louis Gates was talking about Oxen, it was also at the point at which the movie Black Panther was popular, and Black people were just losing their mind about Wakanda forever, right? I mean, I want to go to Wakanda. I think really, if Wakanda existed, there's a large percentage of Black people who would simply pack their bags and go.
Yeah.
Because we need to be in a place where we are loved and respected, and our humanity is not questioned, where we are affirmed, and where we have opportunity to stand upon our merits or the lack thereof, right? And Wakanda just seem to be that place. It's that, but you know what? It is an imaginary place. It doesn't really exist in reality. But Oxen did. And this guy, Izana, because he wasn't the first, his father's name was Ella Amida. And he was an okay emperor from what we understand. And Lalibela was an interesting emperor who came after Izana because he built Lalibela. But what made Izana a standout was that he really was this real life T'Challa in a real life Wakanda that lasted for a real 1,000 years, people. That was a superpower in its day, that had a navy and an army, and Marines. It had palaces built of stonework. But not only that, this man, T'Challa, and for that matter, for the most part, the people of the Aksumite Empire, they spoke 3 different languages and they wrote 3 different languages. And this is important because it dispels that we were in darkness, that we were ignorant, that we were unrefined, that we were uncivilized, that whole narrative that still obtains today. This guy was speaking 3 different languages. What were those languages? Greek, which was the language of trade. And I told you that his empire and many other empires centered around trade. So if you wanted to trade, if you wanted to be a world player at the time that Izana lived, you had to speak Greek. And he spoke Greek and he wrote it as well. But he also spoke Sabaean, which is a Arabic language. And he spoke Gaz, which is spelled G-E-E-Z, Geese, Gaz, but that was the native language of the Aksumite people. So this wasn't no intellectual lightweight. And in that way, he is like T'Challa, who, you know, the character is very intelligent, well refined, right? Again, T'Challa's is fictional. Izana, real deal. So you got this guy who has he has a twin brother named Cezanne. Now, in 330 AD, El Amin died, and Cezanne and Izana were still minors. So their mother, Sophia, and there's a black name for you, Sophia, was what we call a regent. She was ruling in their stead. But she couldn't do it all by herself, so she asked one of their slaves, a Syrian slave named Frumentius, to help her both in terms of continuing to educate Izana and Cezanne in terms of the science, the math, philosophy, but to help train those boys to get them ready to be rulers. So Frumentius, who was a slave, he taught the twins everything that they needed to know academically, but he was also a Christian. So the most significant thing that Frumentius did is that he taught them about Jesus. And when Izana became the king, well, they both were co-kings, but Izana had the actual personality and the force of will to actually step up and to do the actual ruling. And I don't know what happened to Cezanne. He kind of fades away into history. But Cezanne becomes this dominant personality. He's the one who's leading the army. He's the one that's doing the day-to-day things in terms of running the government. He's the one who ultimately goes to war with another empire that we've heard of called Kush, right? Remember when we were studying Kush, we said that it existed up until 350 AD. Well, what happened in 350 AD is that they went to war, they ran into this buzzsaw called Izana. Now, if you look at the writings that Izana did in his what's called Stela, and that's a stonework that is still in Oxen today. If you visit Oxen, you'll see this, I don't know, it's like 100-foot stone object carved out of one piece of granite that's standing there, and it tells the story of how they went to war with the Sobas, which was a tribe within Cush, and how they defeated Cush in battle and brought the storied and famed and celebrated empire of Cush to an end, finally, in 350 AD. But Izana was different. This is, again, how he's like T'Challa. Because when the Assyrians, let's go back to a couple of weeks ago, when the Assyrians conquered people, they did a couple of things to disincentivize anyone else from rising up against them or resisting them when they came knocking at the door saying, give me your lunch money. They burned the city to the ground. They tortured the leaders. And for the people that they didn't kill in battle or burn up in fire, they deported is the word, export a product, but you deport people. They deported them to the most distant place that they could find, and they made them work on farms and in what would be factories producing goods for the Assyrian Empire, for the Assyrian people. And they did that so that if you're African American living in Apopka or Orlando or Ocoee, and invading force comes in and takes over and sends us to I don't know, some remote place on planet Earth, like Taiwan, where you don't know anything about the language or the culture, you're just essentially in a cultural prison. So the Assyrians did that on a regular basis. They were notorious for doing that kind of thing. The Babylonians, not so much. The Romans, not so much, because the Romans and what history taught us was that the one way that the empires that lasted for a long time were able to last for a long time is that when they conquered people, they said, look, we're going to put our governor in place, or actually we'll let your guy or your girl continue to rule. Here's the deal. Pay your taxes. Don't try to organize an uprising, and we're cool. And so in that way, and people knew that they could just go back to work and that there's just going to be a different flag over the building, but otherwise things are the same. Then, people just want to live. People just want to be able to feed their families and be in safety and be healthy. So the wise empires pretty much allowed people to maintain local rule, and they would put up regional leaders, but not the Assyrian Empire. But let's go now to the other end of the spectrum, because the Oxenite Empire was noted in history. Izana was noted in history for being the ruler that went the extra mile in the other direction. When he would conquer land and he would come upon people who were living on land that really barely supported their existence, he would relocate them to fertile land, where they could become supportive of themselves, where they could feed their families. He would give people stuff. He wouldn't take it away. Now, all empires do a certain amount of taking away, but this guy was not just a brilliant man, but he was a kind and a compassionate and a godly man. And if you ever make it to Oxen and you read his Stella, it's written on there when he chronicles his battle with Cush, the Empire of Cush. And he says and I'm paraphrasing, because obviously I've never been to Cush, but I've read in the books what he wrote on the Stela. But essentially what he said is, by the power of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, because he's now a Christian and he's giving all praise and glory to God. By the power of the Son and the Holy Ghost, power of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I was able to win this battle, to conquer, to be victorious in the name of Jesus. I was victorious through the power of God Himself. And unless you are confused about which God I'm talking about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's written out on stone. So why is that important? Because if you're doing Western civilization, anyone here has ever taken a Western civilization class, and we're going to go to the comments. There's some comments in the chat. Anyone here ever had a Western civilization class? You can unmute if you have.
I have a while ago.
Well, if you have, or anyone here has ever taken a class in the history of Christianity, which I have as well, they give a person by the name of Constantine credit for being the first empire to convert to Christianity, to convert Rome to Christianity. But historically, that is not true. This guy, Izana, was the first emperor to not only convert to Christianity, but to persuade his entire country. And we're going to get into this in just a moment, because everyone in Oxen did not convert. And generally speaking, what happened is when a new religion would come into a country, it would start at the bottom and eventually filter its way up. And that's kind of how it happened in Rome. But in the case of Oxen, Christianity started at the top and then filtered down. But if you know the story of Constantine, Rome was in a battle, or having a civil war, which ultimately, Rome divided into two empires and then it went away. But when Rome was in a battle and Constantine was a leader of one of the sides, he reported that he had a vision the night before he was going to battle. And in that vision, he saw the cross and he heard a voice say, "Conquer under this symbol." And so when he woke from the vision, he created this symbol and he went out to battle, and guess what? He won. So from that point on, historians say Rome began to convert to Christianity. But what actually happened was Rome had, the empire, not the city, a pantheon of gods, which means many different gods that they believed in. And they believed that they had to pay homage or honor to all of the gods, not just some gods. And the reason why Christians were being persecuted so severely in Rome is that they taught there's only one God. And all the rest of these gods are just fakes and phonies, pagans. And the reason why the Romans were upset with the Christians is that they figured, you're putting our national safety in jeopardy. Because if you disrespect this God, he's going to not protect us. So the Romans severely persecuted the Christians up to the point that Constantine, quote unquote, converted. Those who do closer reading say that Constantine never actually converted. On his deathbed, he was baptized, but he always continued to recognize other pagans. So what actually happened, if you do the reading, and I encourage you to do it, what actually happened in Rome was that Christianity was allowed to join the pantheon of gods who were recognized. In other words, its status was changed from illegal to legal, but these other religions continued to exist. Now, by contrast, what happened in Oxen is that when Izana literally converted in 333 AD, he said, "This is now the only religion that we will respect and regard, Christianity. Jesus is Lord." Now, why don't we know about that, guys? Why don't we know about that? Jesus is Lord. Now, everyone wasn't happy. There was a contingency of Jewish people living in Oxen, had been living there. Historians tell us different things about how long they've been there. But at the earliest date, they arrived in Oxen in Ethiopia in 1500 BC. Some people in Ethiopia today say that the Ethiopian eunuch that is spoken of in the book of Acts, the 8th chapter, was one of those Jews who came up for one of the high holy days. And this is evidence that Judaism was actually going on in modern day Ethiopia back then. There is some confusion because I told you before that the reference point is the Kandaki or the Candace, and we know that the Ethiopians did not refer to their female leaders as Candaces, but the Cushites did, the Kandakis, the powerful women. But suffice it to say that not Judaism was well established in the Horn of Africa as the first Abrahamic religion. It was there when Christianity arrived. So for purposes of this conversation, assume that eunuch was actually from Oxen. There are other reports, secular reports, non-biblical reports that say that Matthew, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, actually came to Oxen and preached the gospel. That's what the Orthodox Christian Church of Ethiopia teaches today. You know, there is still a vibrant church in Ethiopia today. It's interesting, out of all of the African countries that were conquered and colonized, there's only one country in Africa that was never colonized, and that's Ethiopia. And there's only one country in Africa that has remained steadfastly Christian from the time that they converted to the present hour. That someone probably is having church right now somewhere in Ethiopia, is Ethiopia. Former Oxen. So it's relevant, it's important. Let me go to the chat room and see if there's some comments. Yes, Phyllis tells us that there is for those of you who live in Florida, because there's Carrie and Terry, but when you visit, there's an actual Oxenite coffee shop in downtown Winter Garden. And we just kind of happened to go by there once, and we went in and we said, you know that this shop is named after a famous African empire? They said, yes, of course we know that. We did it intentionally. We have, I think they said they adopted, this is a white family, white Christians. They adopted six children from Ethiopia that are now their children. They visit, and what you should know about Oxen in Ethiopia, in short, and this is just popular culture stuff, but just interesting facts to know, is that coffee comes from Ethiopia. The first coffee that was ever brewed and distributed in the world, that was one of the products that they traded with the world. Was coffee. The best coffee and the first coffee comes from Oxen. So if you are downtown Winter Garden, and you just not Winter Garden Village, but down the actual downtown Winter Garden, and you want to walk the shops, go in there and get some of that original African coffee, connect to the motherland, Oxen coffee shop. Thank you for sharing that, Phyllis. Carrie says, if Wakanda existed, she would be there. I think a lot of us would, Carrie. I think not because we hate America, but because we want a better living experience than what we've had and what we're having. We know that we are deserving not to be treated better than other people, but to be treated better than we are being treated. But the first step, class, along that journey is to know thyself, to know what is true about our history and to know what is not true. Why is it important to know your history? Well, let's just talk about this. Anyone here ever gone to the doctor's office for the first time? Never been to the doctor's office, and the doctor will hand you a clipboard, right? And what does he want to know, or what does she want to know about you? What's the most, at this point, beyond your current symptoms, what is a very important question that the doctor's going to ask you if you've never visited this doctor before?
Family history.
Your family history. Is there anyone here on this Zoom call in this class today that would question the importance of knowing family history? It tells you what potentially lies ahead for you, because it's literally in your genes. If we understand that from a what we call a micro medical level, please understand that that's true on a broad macro level. Knowing your history is predictive, it's instructive. It tells you the good that you can build upon, but it tells you also the bad that you can avoid. And that's why history is so important. Let me move rapidly. So I told you that Judaism was well established in Oxen at the time that Christianity was introduced. And for the most part, Izana was successful in convincing his country, his fellow countrymen and women to convert to Christianity. But there was a contingency of Jewish people who were staunchly resistant, who actually led a rebellion, went up into the mountains, organized, and came back on another day and overthrew the government. They were led by a Jewish Ethiopian Oxenite female named Queen Judith. Now, Christianity never was completely eliminated from Oxen, but it did fall into a state of declination for an extended 400-year period, where Judaism was the prevalent and prominent religion in Oxen. But then at the end of that, and let's just talk about when that happened, by the way, when Judith rose up. Some say 940 AD, some say 960. So we can say safely between 940 and 960, there was an uprising of the Jews who had been there prior. But let's get back to Izana. Izana, not only in putting in declaring his public commitment to God on the stela, his victory stela, but he also did something prior to him converting to Christianity. They had gold coins. They were one of the only African countries that actually created currency, gold coins. And they had, because they worshiped a god that somehow was related to the moon. So they had the symbol of the moon, or the half moon, the crescent, on their coins. But what do you think Izana did with the coins when he converted to Christianity? Anybody? Somebody? He put
the cross,
symbol of the cross on all of their money to say to the world, because they found these coins in India, they found these coins in China. We are a Christian people. So who is this that is saying that Islam is the original religion of Black people? Where are you getting your information from, sir, ma'am? Now, I'm not trying to disparage Islam. I'm just simply trying to say we need to know what our actual roots are here, what our actual spiritual foundation is. Now, folks, I love history, not because I like to talk about old things that are not relevant, things that are dead and long gone, but I like history for the same reason that we just discussed a moment ago, in terms of when you go to the doctor's office and they put that clipboard in front of you and they ask you questions. They're not really trying to get in your business, Sister Tanja.
Be out of this.
I call Phyllis and Tanja, my wife, and her sister, I call them the CIA, because they have a lot of codes and secret business that I'm not a part of. And then when I try to probe in and something, they're like, get out of our business. Nobody talking to you. Well, when the doctor asks you questions, Phyllis, Tanja,
Hey, Phyllis, who's doing us wrong?
they ain't trying to get in your business. They're
real
trying
wrong.
to protect you and direct you for the future. So let's not get twisted about what Jerry Girley is concerned about. I'm looking for the path forward for Black people, for all people. But because this is Black history and we happen to be Black, I think we should be concerned about Black people. Now, let me put that in my context here. And I speak as Jerry, not as someone who's in a position of authority. We can't say that we love the world and we want to save the world, but we don't have time to spend with our son and our daughter. That we can't stand our neighbor, but we want to send money to China to help the people, the Christians over there. We want to do a mission trip to Haiti, but we can't stop and do supportive things for people who live in Pine Hills. It doesn't make sense. You are strategically positioned in the families that God has put you in because you have something that you can offer, or they have something that they can offer you. So if we have the love of Jesus in our hearts and in our minds, it makes us care about the people who are closest to us first. That's the way it works. I can't say, I could say it, but I would be discredited, that I'm against Sister Lynn, domestic abuse, but I'm yelling at Phyllis all the time. You at my house and I'm doing this. First of all, the Filmores would kill me, so you wouldn't have to worry about it, Lynn.
Correct.
Oh no, I got your back, Jerry.
Wait a minute.
Hey, stop, time out. No. Point is, we get this disconnect. We're talking about Jesus and the great getting up morning, and we want to see the cloud and the chariot swing low and all of that, but we can't stand our neighbors. And we're barely talking to our children. And we're not demonstrating the love of Jesus in our neighborhoods and in our cities. And our mission feels irregular. All right, so I'm working this. Let me go to the comments because there's a lot of comments. Lynn says, wow, I didn't know that, and I would support them with my love of coffee. Thank you. That's talking about the Oxen coffee shop in Winter Garden. Yes, please check them out. Last time I was there, which was maybe a month ago, they were there operating, and it's a nice place because they have the internet, free internet. You can go there and hang out. Inez says, it would be interesting to get a group to take a trip to tour to Ethiopia. Yes, you're getting ahead of me, Sister Inez. That's what I definitely want to do. Now I have to convince my wife, y'all pray with me. Phyllis is on here. Going to Ethiopia. But yeah, I would like to actually do the whole 9, start at
No,
the
you
bottom
do not.
the Rift Valley and work all the way up to Kemet. I think it would be instructive. And again, why? In the same way that I talked about earlier in this conversation, going to Pine Bluff. Heard a lot about Pine Bluff. When I got there, I love Pine Bluff, and I still love Pine Bluff. And I'm trying to buy as much land as I can. And that's going to bring me to one of my points here, guys. Said Angie just says, good morning. And Sister Lynn said, that would be a great idea. We are already there. I'm already thinking about that. I definitely, if God give me the grace and the ability and the time, I want to see if that can happen. I actually know some people from Eritrea, which is a part of Ethiopia. I'm going to try to reach out to them because if you go to a place, you really need to try to connect with someone who knows the place, right? For many reasons, for safety and just for ease of travel. But yes, thank you, because if you guys are feeling this way, then I'm doing the job that I hope that I could do, which is create just ever so slightly some interest in your own history. And I've told you that it's not just Black history, it's world history, it's human history. That was just reaffirmed 3 days ago by the University of Oxford. Don't take Jerry Girley's word for it, do the research. When we talk about this particular area of the world, it is the Pine Bluff of the world in the context in which I've been speaking about Pine Bluff. And you hear a lot about different things, different places, but the only way you know for sure is if you go, you check it out. Now, last I checked, we were in the United States of America. For time's sake, I want to ask some questions. Does anyone know, what did I say about major rivers, by the way, in terms of God's involvement? Let's do a little bit of quick review. Does anyone know what I said about major rivers?
That's the origin of civilization. That's where it started.
And so what is God's role in people in major rivers? That's that further statement. Pastor, you're absolutely right.
Plant them by that so they can grow.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Prosper.
That's the point that I'm getting to. Terry, flesh and blood has not revealed that to you, but the outline, which is not in heaven, but it's But now, having said that, let's fast forward in time. Before we fast forward in time, let me go back to to a statement that Joseph made. Y'all remember the biblical character Joseph, whose brother sold him into slavery, right?
Right.
And fast forward, Jacob has died. The brothers are thinking, oh man, Joseph gonna lower the boom on us now because daddy's dead and he's just been waiting to get some get back on us because we sold him into slavery. And they approach Joseph rather, and they say, Daddy said, and I'm paraphrasing, Daddy said, you got to treat us nice. Daddy said, Daddy, what did he say to them about this whole slave experience in Egypt? What did he say to them that's instructive today to this conversation?
And God meant it for their good, for our good.
You meant it for what?
Evil.
Evil.
But God meant it for what? For
The good.
He says something that's even more striking, Black people. He said, you did not send me here. Now they actually did, right? But he said, you didn't send me here. Who sent me?
God.
Yeah. Mhm.
Now my question, class, as we bring this conversation about Black history to a close, is it possible that the reason why there are now 47 million Black people on the North American continent is that God sent us here? Just throwing that out there, folks. Is it possible?
Yes, very.
Definitely.
Obviously.
Well, let me come at it another way. If God is sovereign, which means he's in control, could it happen unless he approved it?
Nope.
Now then, the last thing I want to ask you, class, for your consideration, for your homework, is to take a look at the United States Census map that they come out with every 10 years that tracks where all the ethnic groups live in America. Did you know that they actually do that? Now, we tell the world that we're one melting pot, but actually the United States Census tracks the people of different ethnic origins, such as Irish, German, English, Latino, and African. How many of y'all knew that? That there's an actual map that they come out with every 10 years that says, this is where the Black people live, majority. This is where the people of Irish descent. This is where the people of Italian descent live primarily in America. How many of you knew that that map existed?
I did.
Every 10 years, they create this map. You can find it when you get off this class on Google. Google it. Don't take my word for it, please. Google it. For the last 100 years, when they created this map and they track where the Black people are most heavily concentrated, guess what it revealed? Black people are most heavily concentrated in the South. Go figure. Not in Chicago, not in LA or Long Beach, Terry, not in New York City.
Not in Florida either then.
Well, Florida is the South, so yes, somewhat. Let's get down to it. The state that has the largest percentage, the largest number of Black people living in it today is New York, followed by Texas, followed by Florida. Florida has about 3.2 million Black people. New York has in excess of 4 million Black people. Texas is somewhere between Florida and New York. The majority of the Black people that live in New York live in and around the New York metro area. But the migration pattern in terms of Black people in New York is that more Black people are leaving New York than are going there. The same is the case, Terry, in Los Angeles and Long Beach. More Black people are now coming back to the South. The #1 destination is Atlanta, Georgia, that now has 2 million Black people. 20 years ago, I think Atlanta, Georgia had like 560,000 Black people. Black people are moving to the South. Now, but within the South, there is a particular region of the South where Black people are most heavily concentrated. Guess where that is?
Memphis.
Memphis is a part of that place. Memphis, now I'll give you a clue for purposes of time. What does Memphis, St. Louis, Baton Rouge, Natchez, and New Orleans all have in common.
They on that river.
They're on the river. They're on the river. And the heaviest concentration of Black people in America is along the Mississippi River.
Mississippi.
The great, you know what, the word Mississippi is a Native American word. It means the great river. So I asked the question a moment ago, is it possible that God sent us here? Not let us come here, but sent us here, which is an affirmative act, not an acquiescence. Is it possible that God actually sent us here? Yes. Is it possible, let me go one step further, that he planted us here?
Yes.
If he plants someone, where does he normally, if he wants them to thrive and not die down and be oppressed perpetually, if he wants them to thrive and to grow, where does he plant them?
By the river.
And where are we most heavily concentrated?
By the river.
By the river.
Mississippi.
By the great Mississippi. Let's go to the chat room. All right. Tanja said, if we go to the real Wakanda, which is the Nilotic cultures, that is Oxen, Kush, and by the way, Kush today is Sudan, which means Arabic, which means the Black Land, and Kemet. If we go, she says, I'm there to go. Phyllis says, I'm there too. All right, we got a team, boy. We got a team. I'll start collecting deposits. Sister Florence said, family history is very important. I wasn't raised with my sisters and brothers. I have to call to find out information about illness. Well, Sister Florence, if we can come back on a serious note. I've been serious the whole time, by the way, guys. But Sister Florence, that is the tragedy of the Great Migration. That there's so many things that I don't know about my grandma Nim. And I know I said Nim, and I know that's not proper English, but you get it, right? I don't know. There's so many things that I only heard my paternal grandfather's voice maybe twice, 3 times maximum. And one of the times he was yelling at us for chasing my sister Terry. Stop chasing that girl, something like that. I'm jealous of Phyllis, Tanja, Angie, who grew up around their grandmother, who spent many Saturdays and sleepovers with Grandma and them. We didn't have that.
Nope, sure didn't.
And many of the Black people that I know growing up in Long Beach, their parents from the South, from Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, and they didn't have those experiences either. And when we were fortunate, sometimes we would be able to go, our white friends during the summer or during spring break, they would go to Hawaii or Fiji or Tahiti, and we would go to Alabama and Arkansas, going to visit our cousins and them. But segregation and oppression robbed us of so much. I never really got to know my paternal grandfather. I did get to know my maternal grandfather somewhat. And my paternal grandmother, I had some conversations with her, my father's mother, just before I met Phyllis. This is the December before I met Phyllis. I was in the Navy, so I went and spent the Christmas with my grandmother. She gave me some lessons. She said, now, if you're getting ready and you're thinking about marrying a girl, you got to make sure she can cook. I said, okay, Grandma. She said, so what you do is you tell her you're coming over to the house at 5 for dinner, and then you show up at 3. And if her mama cooking, don't marry her because she can't cook. That's the deepest conversation I ever had with my grandma.
That's wisdom. That's wisdom.
He couldn't cook, he married her.
I thought it was humorous, but so what I'm envisioning, guys, is this. This is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. And I'd very, very, very much like to actually take that trip with as many people who are interested in taking that trip. A lot of work has to be done. before then for getting that, but I would start looking in that direction, because how can I be an authority on this topic if I've actually never been there? I mean, I've been there on YouTube every other day, and these documentaries every other day, and all the readings that I do, and the books that my family have bought me because they know I'm interested in this topic. But we may not be able to connect with Oxen, but you can connect. Here's another thing, people that are on this. If you've got relatives that live in Zellwood and it's been a long time since you talked to them, you can connect with them, the Neils, the Orrs, the Petersons, the Browns, wherever your relatives are. Black power and Black history, Black love looks like touching and caring about the people that are in arm's length to you.
I got a family unit meeting today for the Oars now.
Huh?
I said, I have
You
a
said the
family
Oars?
reunion meeting. I have a family reunion meeting for the Oars today now.
Well, praise the Lord, Sister
Amen.
Angie. Comments.
That's me.
Oh, that. Sister Inez says, when is the next Black Bible history class? Well, let me ask this question. Are you interested in, I have this furtive mind, I can develop additional material. If I develop additional Black history material beyond Black History Month, would there be any interest in attending?
Definitely.
Being a part of it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you gotta go in there, bro.
All
You
right.
got me. I'm be, yeah.
Me too. Yes, yes.
All right. Then
You can make it
I'll,
like once a month or something. Yeah. I'll be in.
I'll
That's
work
what I'm
on that.
thinking,
I'll
very
check
well.
with my boss first. If she gives me the approvals, then I'll start working on that. Carrie,
If you don't get a new boss.
no, that's not,
Hey,
no,
hey,
no,
hey,
no,
hey.
sir, no, sir, no, sir.
Yes,
don't
you
have
can
to.
do it.
Oh, you military.
There's
Ain't no
time
new
to
boss.
fight, you'll fight. Okay.
Carrie,
Carrie,
don't make us take a trip, please.
Oh,
all right,
wait.
wait, hold on. Carrie says, Carrie's in Long Beach, by the way, guys. Lost my own family history. I grew up knowing my maternal grandmother, but she always told us that it was best if we left those folks where they are because they were practicing voodoo. Ooh, ooga, ooga. Listen, Carrie, this is part of that narrative that we've got to work through. When the white Christians came into the west coast of Africa, everything that was foreign to them, they categorized as demonic and evil. They confused and they conflated their culture as being Christ. So when they were sharing Christ, they were also sharing their culture. So when our enlightened and woke brothers and sisters say that Christianity is the white man's religion, that's half true. To the extent that they have attacked our very culture, our very existence, our Blackness, said that the color of our skin was a curse from God, that is white psychobabble nonsense. And it is the white man's religion. So now voodoo does exist. I'm not trying to disparage that, but be very careful. And I'm not speaking ill of your grandmother, but it's just that I've heard this criticism. And Phyllis and I were talking about this very recently. We were at a Black church, and it was a Black minister who was very heavily involved and influenced by white organizations, who taught that the Africans communicated with spirits through the drum. So the drum is evil. So you shouldn't have the drum in your worship service because it conjures up wicked spirits. Listen, you take the drum out of a Black church, how many Black churches are you gonna have?
I know that's right.
So everything that
Next
was
to be the
part of our
tambourines.
culture was not wicked, was not evil. That's nonsense. That is the white man's attempt, not only to introduce us and to convert us to Christianity, but to convert us to Europeanism. And we don't have to be Europeans. We are not Europeans. We are people of African descent. We are the sons and the daughters, and for that matter, as we've been reminded just 3 days ago, they are too. They just don't know it. We're all, in the sense that I've been discussing it, we are all from Pine Bluff. My father told me something that was very striking to me. Told me this maybe just a month and a half ago, and he's 84 years old. Very, very much intellectually superior to me in every way. I feel like I'm in nursery school when I'm talking to him at length. But he told me something that was so, I don't know, baffling, that when he grew up in his younger age, they didn't wear shoes to school. When they went to elementary school, when he first went to elementary school, they did not wear shoes. And when they played during the summer, for the most part, they did not wear shoes. So now, fast forward, 84, he's got these fancy Stacey Adams and he loves them and they mean something to him, but he's still in his heart and his mind, from what I can tell, that guy who remembers when he didn't wear shoes, when he didn't have shoes to wear, maybe one pair to wear to church. And he also told me something, and I'm going here, and I want to hear any comments that you have. And I hear you, and I appreciate the fact that you want more, because I certainly want to be able to facilitate more and even maybe start a cultural school. That's my vision. Sister Lynn, you are an organizer and a planner, Tanja. I have a lot of ideas, but not a lot of time. So I need some support if we're going to do this, if we're going to do this going forward. Because I'm interested in doing it. But anyway, my father told me about the fact that there were 11 siblings in his family. And they had cousins, and they grew up during the time at the end of the Great Depression where there wasn't a lot of food. They didn't have a lot of extra food. And Pastor, you know about this because we've talked about this. There would be time when there wasn't enough food, and my grandmother would look at my grandfather, whose name was Eugene, and she called him Gene, and she said, "Gene, eat some food." He said, "No, give it to the children. I'm all right. I had some food." Or, "Pastor, I'll get a mouthful in after a while," right?
Amen.
But their cousins, they'd be playing at the cousin's house. Whenever was dinner time, the cousins would send them home. And they would secretly go in and eat their food because they didn't have enough food to feed them. So I could see my father barefoot and hungry on the dirt roads of Pine Bluff. How can I possibly think I'm better than him? And why am I saying that? How then, if we are now in America, how can we possibly think that we are better than our people in Africa? How can we not love and respect and appreciate and value them and want to support them and know that we can learn from them and draw strength from them even right now? How is that? That's where the Europeanism comes in, I think, where we are taught to look down our nose to think that we're somehow different than them. We're not. I'm no different than my father and my cousins and my grandma and them. I'm a part of them. I'm of them. They are of me and a part of me. And so what I'm talking about here, folks, sometimes when we get into this conversation about Black power, it is construed by the majority population as hating white people. This doesn't have anything to do with hating anyone. This has everything to do with loving ourselves, because we've been taught to not love ourselves, to call each other Black and ugly.
Nappy head, don't
nose,
forget nappy head.
nappy headed, big lips.
They paying for them lips now.
And I have a prophetic word, and I'm speaking as a minister, and I mean this sincerely. I'm not even joking, not even a little bit. I have a prophetic word for you beautiful Black people. Love yourselves because God loved you. And you are not forgotten.
Amen.
You are not forsaken. You are positioned for greatness, for great things to come. You are positioned literally by the river. And great things await us in the future. We'll now collect the offering. All right, let's see. Got some comments in the comments.
Where do we send the offering?
There's no offering. That's a figure of speech, Carrie, that comes from charade. After you've said something so profound, you drop the mic, you just say, go now collect the offering. But I do want you to reflect on what I just said. Sister Tanja says, I know I love me and everything about me. Well, go ahead then, Sister Tanja.
Of course.
You love
Amen.
yourself. Yeah.
I'm
Go ahead and
glad
love
that's
yourself.
true.
Yeah.
That's a comment on what I commented right before.
Okay. All right. We should love our big lips and all the features. And listen, guys, we
'Cause
were
we
in
got it
Bible
for free.
study. We were not with that Bible study, it was Shaba. And the whole thing about one of the sisters said she wants to lose 5 pounds. And I said, you know what? In America, we are obsessed with weight. And we've been talking about that Kandaki. You go back and you look at the image of the Kandakis. I meant to do that. Ran out of time. You go back and look at that Kandaki woman, the image of the Kandaki, Amani Reynes. They're images of her. She got some serious hips. Serious hips. And it has been the inclination of Black men throughout time to appreciate the full figure. Don't try to be anything than what you are. Now, we should all be mindful of our weight for health reasons, but not for cosmetic considerations. Be who you are, be who God has made you to be. Celebrate your uniqueness, your
Amen.
lips, your lips, Sister Phyllis, and your hips. It's all divine. Comment in the chat.
Amen.
Just an amen and an amen. That's from Sister Tanja. And I can't add to that. Are there any questions or any comments? I promise you guys, if I have your emails, by the way, grab your pencil and your pen. Grab something to write with so that I'll remember, and Sister Phyllis is on this. If you're interested in having further materials and attending further classes, which we'll have to work out logistically, or if you're interested in potentially, because again, I have a lot of ideas, but I've worn Phyllis out with all the organization stuff. All this, a lot of the organization, the typing of the material, the editing of the material, that runs through Phyllis. And I don't want to put too much more on her plate because she might fire me. But I think what I'm talking
good.
about is the real Wakanda thing happening and developing. And it takes a team of people. Now, I have the ideas, but I don't have the team. So if you're interested in being a part and supporting developing more material and getting this out to more people, please let me know. Send us an email at phyllis@thegirleylawfirm.com. phyllis@thegirleylawfirm.com.
I already know that.
Phyllis is Phyllis. The @ spell out the word the. Girley is Girley, lawfirm.com. phyllis@thegirleylawfirm.com. We'll create a list. We'll start, very tentatively looking at what's out there in terms of trips, in terms of possibilities of getting over there to the East Coast of Africa, getting over to the Pine Bluff, the ultimate Pine Bluff. Maybe we can do something as a cute little in-between on a Friday. We can go together as a group over to the Oxen coffee shop. That'd be interesting. And kind of arrange it so that they know we're coming, because those people have been to Oxen several times. And they have a business that's based over there as well. So maybe they can give us some insight, like as a preview, and tell us some things about traveling. The sky's the limit. We're only limited by our imagination. But again, phyllis@thegirleylawfirm.com. Folks, this has been wonderful. I appreciate your excitement and your energy. I've been honored to be the bus driver, not the expert. My entire life, what I aspire to be is a student and an inspiration to others to study. Got a couple comments. This is Sister Florence. She says, I got to visit relatives, and my sister says, I'm just like my paternal grandmother, Big Mama. Well, that's genetic. And I'd imagine that if you had a chance to, the rest of us, we would have the same testimony. Phyllis said, I'm good. And Brooke says, Brooke has changed her name. One of her, I guess it is her, what is it, Instagram account? She's changed her name to Kandaki.
It's Twitter.
Twitter, it's Twitter, to Kandaki.
Kandaki, okay.
All right, because that's the Black powerful woman, you know, not thin as a rail, not anorexic, just full and powerful in every sense of the term. But remember, the original woman, the original woman. Now, Sister Florence made a comment about her relatives told that she's like Big Mama. Just quick story about that. So I'm very much into ancestry, you might imagine. So my father's mother's family is called the Belchers. They're from South Carolina, a place called Abbeville, South Carolina. 3 years ago, or when was that? When there was a hurricane that was coming through here and we had to leave Orlando and we drove up to Georgia. Sister Tanja was with us, the Filmores were with us. So I knew that they lived in Abbeville, South Carolina. Never been there, never met these people. They don't know me from Adam's cat. So when the hotel that we were staying in was an hour away from that. We were in Georgia, but it was just across the border, across the river, the Savannah River. I don't know how I did it, but I convinced Mother Filmore, Pastor Filmore, Tanja, and Phyllis to get in the van with me and drive an hour across the river to Abbeville, South Carolina, to meet the Belchers, who I'd never met before in my life. But I had the ancestry data that showed that my great-grandfather's name was David Belcher, who came from Abbeville, South Carolina, and his father's name was, I think, David or Tom, it'll come to me, one Belcher, but anyway, I had it all lined up. So I get to the town and I go to the Black side of town and I start asking people, do you know the Belchers? First house, no. Second house, yeah, I know the Belchers. They live around the corner there. You want me to take you around there? Yeah. We get in the car. We knock at the door. These people come, they're living in a fairly nice house, brick house. That's a big thing in the South, by the way, a brick house. Got a nice brick house. They're looking at me and they think I'm some type of solicitor, swindler. And I say, hi, I'm Jerry Girley. I'm your relative. They're looking at me. Yeah, yeah, right. They got the door cracked. They're looking at me. And I say, listen, my father's name's, and they're just talking. But I had a picture of my dad. And I showed them the picture of my dad. And they opened the door wide. And they looked shocked. And I'm like, what are they doing? They showed me a picture on the wall in their house of their grandfather, who they called Papa. And they looked at my dad and they said, he looks like Papa.
And they go, thank you.
Then it was on. Then I was family, then I was kinfolk. And they tell me about the Belcher Plantation, which was a few miles down the road, 197 acres land, just living on Belcher Street. There was a Belcher Street with all these houses on. So yes, the thing about being separated from our family is that we don't know what we don't know. And what we don't know is how much we are like so many other people in the world. This is the tragedy of slavery. But it is within our power, and I think within our duty, to now go back and to reconnect these dots. Guys, it's been wonderful. I look forward to doing it again real soon. If there are no further questions or comments.